You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 378 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin. Comes to us high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It's going great, Jeremy. Thanks. It's a beautiful day in Wrigleyville. Too bad the Cubs are out of town and not playing.
It is a beautiful day. The weather is finally turning as we turn the calendar to June. We've had quite a May to recap for the Chicago Cubs. To help us break down all of the news the week that was, we'll preview the week that will be, and of course we close the show every week with a classic Cubs player profile. And helping us do that this week, you know him from his work at NBC Chicago and, of course, his many appearances here on the podcast. Longtime friend of the show, James Neveau. James, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
Good evening, gentlemen. Very excited to be back with you. I feel like I've been on potentially, 37 maybe of the 378 podcast episodes. I feel like I'm a fairly recurring guest at this point, and honestly, it is an honor to talk to you both for that reason.
True Blood brought this up last week. He wants to know where the standings are, and I said we will pull the standings as we get to the All-Star break. We will pull the standings, and we will see where the people are on the all-time charts for appearances on this podcast. You are definitely towards the top for sure, James.
The booby list, right, or whatever. Isn't that what they call those things? Like when you...
I'm like the Don Rickles to your Johnny Carson. I will humbly take that title.
And we are excited this week because we are talking about June. We've turned the calendar to June. We are talking about the first place Chicago Cubs as we are in June with a 37-22 record as of the time of this recording, a 4-game lead in the division over the St. Louis Cardinals, who we are still surprised are playing. We thought that they were not going to be a factor in this division. They are 5.5 ahead of Milwaukee, who we thought was the only threat here in the division. But this is coming off of a May that we saw the Cubs with a 14-4 stretch, 14-4 start to this 21-game stretch that we said was crucial, Pat, and they've answered the call.
Yeah, absolutely. They're right on pace, if not ahead of pace right now. With 3 games left in this 21-game stretch, I think the Cubs are going to end up with 15 over now. If they take 2 out of 3 from Washington, knock on wood, they'd be 16 over. That's exactly what you want to do when you're playing, after you weather the storm with the good teams and then you play a stretch against bad teams, you just got to mow them all down. I did not realize when I made that prediction and was hopeful for that the Brewers and Cardinals would catch fire like they have. Luckily, the Cubs have been able to endure that firestorm because by also winning all these games, the Brewers can win like 8 in a row and not gain any ground in the standings, basically. It must be very frustrating for those teams.
The Brewers 8-2 in their last 10 games. The Cubs also 8-2 in their last 10 games. So, yeah, no ground gained for the hot Milwaukee Brewers right now, James. The Cubs... We said this is the weak part of the schedule. They had to deliver. They did. Colorado came to town. They didn't make it easy, but they did sweep, winning 3 games against Colorado. Thank goodness Colorado's offense is as bad as advertised.
I think that the takeaway that I'm going to have from that, and it's obviously kind of easy to do this when the Cubs have been hitting the way that they've been hitting. I think that you're kind of willing to forgive them a few games where whether it was the wind blowing in or just the fact that balls they were hitting hard were getting caught. I think you're kind of willing to give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt when their offense scuffles a little bit. And I really took away from that series just how impressed I was with their pitching staff in the way that it's not just the guys who are obviously kind of at the top of the mix, because you don't have Shota Imanaga, you don't have Justin Steele, you don't have Porter Hodge right now, but you've got these guys who are coming in and filling these roles beautifully. And I thought that series especially was just such a great example of what makes this team kind of interesting this season. Just the fact they've been able to plug in so many different guys on that pitching staff. You think back to Chris Flexen, who got the win, I believe, in that extra inning game on Tuesday. Daniel Palencia, who, couldn't hit the broadside of a barn when he came up here the last couple of times with the Cubs. Now all of a sudden looks like he's really starting to lock in. Is probably a Kyle Tucker missed fly ball away from having 6 saves at this point already for the Cubs. It's just remarkable to me. This team has been able to, kind of put together this bullpen. And I think we had a ton of questions about it. We probably still do to a degree, but you've seen the emergence of guys like Daniel Palencia. You've seen a guy like Drew Pomeranz come in and do something I don't think any of us thought that he was going to be capable of doing when he came here.
A 0 ERA? That's what I was hoping for.
Your expectations, I've been meaning to talk to you about this, Pat, are outlandishly high, and no one can possibly live up to them. And frankly, I don't know how any of us are friends with you. Knowing that. But I'm struck by how well this team has been able to pitch, and how in the infrequent instances in which their offense has kind of scuffled a little bit, that pitching staff has been able to kind of pick them up. And I thought, Colorado's offense is just god awful. Like, we all get it. But at the same time, you just look at how pitchers performed against that team. They kept the Cubs in every single one of those games and helped them to get that sweep. And I thought that series was a great example of what this staff seems to be capable of doing right now.
Dare I say, minus the one game I was at when he gave up 8 runs without retiring a single batter. Good old friend of the show, Ryan Pressey, has gone almost 24 starts without giving up a run, but for that one game.
Mm-hmm.
I always say with the relief pitcher, give me 20 zeros and 1 8-run outing versus giving me like 2 runs here and a run there and 2 runs here and a run there. That's, you think you'll win more games with the 20 zeros and the one just bad game.
Yeah, having Presley not in the closer spot is helping not only the Cubs bullpen, helping Presley, helping Palencia, but also helping me be less stressed out when he would come in. There was too much Hector Neris vibes at the beginning of this season, but having him slotted a little bit lower, having Palencia filled his spot in a way that they talked about it on the broadcast on Sunday, that Presley is actually also providing some mentorship to a young guy like Palencia in that role.
Yeah, and I think that can't be overstated, the importance of that. And I think that especially with the struggles that he had when he first came up to the Cubs and he wasn't really able to kind of find that form. I mean, you could look at the team's bullpen, and it's not like they've been blessed with like a bounty of guys that can fire it in there 101 miles an hour, right? Like, that's been kind of our big criticism of the way the Cubs have kind of put together their bullpens in recent years, has been they don't have enough velocity. They're like really looking for guys who can kind of dink and dunk and induce weak contact, and that's not what you ideally want in a bullpen. You want guys who can absolutely blow the ball by you, or at the very least have insanely wild movement that induces ugly swings. Like, that's what you want, but the Cubs really haven't been able to get that, and they've been hoping and praying Daniel Palencia would end up giving that to them. And obviously I have no reason to doubt that it's true that Ryan Pressey has taken on this role of being a really effective mentor to him and then probably to some of the other guys in that bullpen. That's exactly what you would want a guy to do in an ideal situation. Like, he came in, expected to be the closer, lost the job, ended up, still pitching in 6th, 7th inning situations. I love that he's picked up that mantle as a potential role model for a Daniel Palencia. And I think the results have really spoken for themselves. And I think we've seen basically what we kind of were hoping that Palencia would end up being capable of so far this season during this call-up.
It would have been a different tone to this podcast, I think, if the Cubs weren't 5-1 this week. If they had lost that game that went to extra innings against Colorado, I think we would have been a little more frustrated where they would have lost the opportunity to sweep a bad team.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a Cade Horton start where he went 6 innings, gave up 4 hits, 2 earned runs, had 6 strikeouts. A great outing for Cade Horton, and you really wanted to see the Cubs pull that one out in extra innings, Pat.
Yeah, I did. I was afraid the Cubs did not, however, because they seemed to do everything in their power to avoid winning the game. One of the things that did bother me a little bit, minor point, I suppose, in the grand scheme of things, but in that particular game, really the Rocky series in general, I think the Cubs have been so prolific with their scoring this year. It hasn't really mattered. But in that game, there were multiple examples of getting a leadoff runner on second base and not being able to move him to third and then score the run. It felt like they gave up a lot of opportunities, and it almost burned them, frankly. In the 10th inning, I had flashbacks to the Giants game where Ryan Presley came in the 12th or whatever and gave up the 8 runs because, you started off with the guy on second base after getting out of, by the way, Flexen got out of a really tough situation. I think, was it man on third or first and third, to start the I guess he had a guy on third and then got the next 2 guys out without giving up a run. So you went into the bottom of the 10th feeling really good. And you had a guy on second, and Ian Happ, for whatever reason, a left-handed hitter at the time, can't hit a ground ball to second or move the ball. It's a shallow fly ball to center, so we don't move the runner to third. And then, of course, they intentionally walk Tucker. And then Suzuki comes in and strikes out. And that's unfortunately happened a couple times in these big moments where Suzuki will come in and strike out of that situation. And then Piquer Armstrong grounded out. And the inning was over. And I'm like, well, that felt like a wasted opportunity. And then to give up a run in the 11th like they did, you really did start to think, oh, boy, this is another of, Giants flashback. And luckily for the Cubs, it was not, because, that was the inning in the 11th when the Rockies had first and third, nobody out, heart of the order up. And somehow the Cubs got out of it with only giving up 1 run. And then, of course, the one advantage in this weird extra inning nonsense is that Piquer Armstrong got to lead off the bottom of the inning at second base. So we did get the runner to third without having to worry about a batter, assisting in that process. He stole third because, of course, Dansby Swanson, when he came up before the stolen base, grounded out before, and so we had man on second and 1 out. I'm like, oh, here we go again. Stole third. And then luckily, Bush was able to score Kerr Armstrong, and then they had Birdie pinch. I thought this was a good move. They had Birdie pinch run for Bush, and then Birdie immediately stole second base, which led Colorado then walk Horner, right, to get to Matt Shaw, the rookie, which was a smart move at the time. At first and second, so a double play gets you out of the inning. And, of course, he comes through at the base hit to win the game. So worked out great for the Cubs. It also probably worked out great for Matt Shaw to get some more confidence. We saw all week both his defense and offense look so much better and more polished than they did first time he was up this year. So what could have been, like Jeremy said at the outset, what could have been kind of a frustrating 2 out of 3 versus Colorado ended up being not just a sweep, but in many respects, a lot of positive signs that they could take out of it.
Yeah, James, how about another week of Matt Shaw doing these great things since he's been called up back to the Cubs?
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at what some of the defensive exploits the Cubs had going on at third base, and we were wondering just how bad things were going to have to get for Matt Shaw to come back up. And thankfully, he decided to hit like 4 home runs in 2 days or whatever it was in Des Moines, and finally really forced that issue for the Cubs where it's like, all right, it looks like he's hitting again. The confidence is there. I guess we're going to bring him back up here. And it's not like he's been lighting the world on fire offensively when he's been back, but I still think that he's had some very professional at bats. Some, results just haven't maybe gone his way. And I thought that at bat against the Rockies in extra innings was a great example of that, where he went down 2 strikes and could have easily overswung at a pitch and struck out. And instead he just really kind of, choked up on the bat and was able to flare that ball into right field to win the game. And I thought it was a very good professional piece of hitting from a guy that I think puts together a lot of really solid at bats. And And I think when you couple that with the fact that he is by a mile the best defensive third baseman you can possibly have up right now, like the plays he's making just look effortless over there at third base. And even the ones that aren't end up being like these spectacular things. The one where he kind of, fell on his backside making a throw the other day and still got the out at first base. I think that there's still plenty to like about his game. And I think that he's really earned, some patience from Cubs brass in terms of kind of getting to where he needs to be at the plate, because I think his approach is correct. And obviously that defense, it is hard to overstate just how much better he's been at it than basically anybody the Cubs have put over there so far this season.
And the Cubs took that momentum into a series against the Reds. This was the Reds
put it in the locker
always,
room on Friday afternoon and didn't use it.
Man, the Reds are always annoying. They're super frustrating. And yeah, the Friday game was just tough. Cubs lose, and then the Cubs end up winning the next 2 out of 3. Winning the next 2 to take 2 out of 3. So let's talk about that Saturday Ben Brown performance. Ben Brown comes in the second inning as they had an opener. They had the aforementioned Pomerantz come in and be the opener. He pitched 1 inning, struck out a guy, and then Ben Brown comes in. 6 innings pitched, gives up a hit and a walk, 9 strikeouts for Ben Brown. This podcast has been pushing for Ben Brown to be a bullpen guy. This type of performance maybe changes my mind a little bit, Pat.
So the idea behind having Pomerantz come in as a starter or opener, as they call it, was that they wanted Brown to be able to get through the lineup at least once. And I guess the theory is if you start with the 4th or 5th hitter, then when you get through the lineup an entire time, maybe you can get through a second time the lower half of the lineup, as opposed to having to start with the top of the lineup and then in the 4th inning, end up with the top of the lineup again. And so that I thought was the strategy, but he was pitching so well that I think they were like, you know what, let's just see how long he can go. And he did quite well. So I looked up his pitch selection because, the idea behind Brown only being able to get through the lineup a certain number of times, ideally once, maybe twice, is that he only throws 2 pitches, right? He throws a knuckle curve and a 4-seam fastball. And I'm like, so what was different in this game with his pitch selection that got him to pitch 6 innings, he didn't have to face a lot of batters because he didn't put too many of them on, but still 20 batters, in the time he was pitching. That's multiple times through the order. So I looked at his pitch count and his pitch selection, and he did throw a changeup once. He threw 2 pitches like he always does. So it wasn't that. I was like, maybe he threw. Maybe I didn't notice he added some extra pitch, some other pitch into the mix. No, he did not. It's like knuckle curve, 4-seam, 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 knuckle curve. Knuckle. I mean, it's just on and on and on in rotation. So, bottom line is he pitched better, and I'll take it. I don't know what that portends for the future against better teams or against better hitters. One of the frustrating parts for this Reds team, for I'm sure Reds fans as well as Cubs fans, but is that the Reds players haven't really performed very well. Even although Ellie De La Cruz does well against the Cubs, he's had kind of a so-so season for what we expected of him. And you've got other guys in that lineup who are underperforming significantly. And so it's not that fearsome of a lineup. So did that help contribute to Brown's success? Certainly did help him last week when he faced him, but
Right.
Whatever. We'll see how it goes. I mean, right now, when you've got Imanaga hopefully coming back in a couple weeks, and whatever other starter support they might be able to get in the future, you just hope every time a Colin Ray or a Ben Brown or somebody like that goes out there that you can make it through and get the win. That's all you're hoping for. I mean, we saw Colin Ray again on Friday, or I did in person, luckily. Yay. Have some trouble with home run balls, and the Cubs were not as fortunate. But to come back after losing the first game and win these next 2, I thought was another good sign for the Cubs. Because that Ben Brown start was the one I was the most worried about of the 3, frankly. And so that worked out well. And then they came back, obviously, and we saw Matt Boyd, not super sharp, but still able to oh wait, no, that was the week before when he pitched against him. It was Tyone this time. Tyone was super sharp, which was nice. Yeah, I'll take what I can get.
Yeah, the Tyone game on Sunday, Cubs win 7-3. Scary moment though, James, when Tucker exits the game in the 5th inning, but turns out just a jammed finger. X-rays negative.
Yeah, I think that we all kind of held our breaths a little bit because it could have been any number of things that could have stemmed from what was an eventful first inning of getting hit by a pitch, and then that slide into second base where like the bill of his helmet dug into the ground and gave him a good shot across the bridge of the nose. You kind of were like, maybe it's concussion protocol, something like that, and then it turns out to just be the jammed finger, and he had a hit after that even, didn't he? Like, it's not like it really kind of bugged him that much. So I think that it could have been obviously a lot worse, but really does kind of show they've lost a lot of guys, and it's obviously caused them some issues of operating without Ian Happ for a little while, etc., where you see there are certain guys on this roster that if you pull that particular card out of the pyramid, a lot of stuff could end up falling down. And obviously Kyle Tucker feels like a very ideal candidate for such a thing. So you kind of have like these frightening visions in your head, especially when the tough games that are laying ahead for them, that they're going to have to maybe deal without him. That would have really been that'd have been Cody Bellinger May of 2023 when he hurt his ribs down in Houston. That would have been just like the completely wrong time for something like that to happen. So thank goodness it doesn't seem like it's that serious, and it does sound like he'll be available for the start of that road trip coming up.
Yeah, when we think about Kyle Tucker, we think about how important it is for the Cubs to re-sign him and keep him on this team. We are pro Kyle Tucker being part of the Cubs going forward. We're also pro the Cubs extending Pete Crow Armstrong as well. I did want to get both of your thoughts on where that is. We'll talk more about Kyle Tucker and his deal, but there's been a lot of talk about the extension of PCA and what's going on with that. And James, I wanted to get your thoughts on what do you hope to see out of a deal here with PCA in the short term?
I think that, you're probably not going to get him for what you were trying to offer him before the season started. The, ballpark is $65 to $75 million. I don't think that that's going to kind of be, getting that job done. But I think when you look at a guy like PCA, I think you're probably looking more in kind of like that, maybe the Jackson Merrill kind of range, where I think that maybe something in the ballpark like of 125 to 150 million would end up getting it done. And I know that is a lot of money for a guy who's basically coming up on like one full season of being a really strong MLB player. But at the same time, if you don't lock him into that money and he continues the ascent, and you really do have to consider to yourself that the defense is going to continue being an asset. The base running ideally will continue being an asset. And if he can maybe cut down on his strikeout rate a little bit, maybe draw a few more walks, he did. I think it was Saturday, drew a couple of walks against the Reds, and you're starting to wonder if maybe he's kind of improving that eye a little bit at the plate. If those things keep happening and he can continue to have a solid amount of power, $135-150 million contract for a guy like that ends up being a bargain at a certain point, especially if you back that up by re-signing Kyle Tucker and locking those guys in and making them the cornerstones of your franchise for years down the line. Can you imagine how many of those electric blue Cubs jerseys they will sell if they re-sign both of those guys? I've already been seeing PCA jerseys and Kyle Tucker jerseys around Wrigley Field. I can't even imagine the merchandise sales if they were to lock both those guys in. So I think that is just like having guys like that can hit and can defend the way that they do, and especially how young PCA is. I feel like it's a no-brainer to sign him to a contract extension. And if he wants something like the Jackson Merrill deal, I'm shoving it at him right now, and I'm getting that done before the price point gets even higher.
Pat, does that sound like a good price point to you?
Yeah, I'll buy a jersey if they re-sign both guys, I guess. I mean, whatever. I've bought jerseys for less. Yeah, my concern with PCA has always been the lack of ability to draw walks, and until this weekend when he finally did walk, I think he had struck out 20 or 21 consecutive times. It's 21 times since his last walk. I mean, it took him a long time to go from 9 to 10. And that is a little bit concerning because when he's not hitting as well, you still want him to get on base because he's so fast. He can do so much on the base paths. You don't want his batting average to be the sole predictor of his on baseness. So you want to get him on as much as you can. With that said, and given how well he started, unlike Kyle Tucker, I think that the labor situation might benefit the Cubs with Piquet Armstrong. In other words, there's talk about how in 2027, after the 2026 season, getting ahead of ourselves here, there might be a labor stoppage because the owners want to either put in some sort of either a salary cap or a ceiling or significantly change the free agency rules in a way more favorable to them. For a young guy like PCA, the Cubs do have a little bit of leverage because that's sort of like the sword of Damocles hanging over him. And while he may not want to sign for, 115 million over 6 years, whatever it was that Jackson Merrill got, he may feel like, well, maybe that's not so bad given what the market, because the unknown is probably only going to go negatively towards him in the future. Whereas with Kyle Tucker, the Cubs are the ones who are like, well, do we want to re-sign this guy to a long-term deal for a lot of money when there might be a more favorable economic situation for us in the future as a team? So it's almost like a competing force there. So I would like to see them get something done with both of them, obviously, but certainly he has incentives to get a deal done. Although he does seem to have a lot of self-confidence, so maybe he'd rather not. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But really, when you think about it, there are a couple things that could happen, but the main thing is, I mean, he could just turn out to be kind of a bust, but even by his standards, a bust is just like a great defensive center fielder with a lot of speed who can't hit. But what he does gets a decent amount of home runs. Like a bad PCA still is probably at this point looking at 20 homers a year and 40 stolen bases and playing great defense and maybe being a 2.8 WAR player because he just can't hit and doesn't walk, right? That's the worst. That's the floor. The ceiling, though, is so much higher that if I'm the Cubs, what do I care if I pay him 115 million or 125 million or 130? What's an extra 10 or 15 million total over the course of 6 years for somebody who could be a superstar, right? So I think from their standpoint, they should be aggressive to get something done sooner than later.
I will also point out that if you get him for less than $150 million, you're getting him at a cheaper rate than Jason Hayward ended up getting paid. And I know the Cubs have been famously, kind of hesitant to give out those types of contracts again. If I'm going to give him that kind of money and get that statistics you're talking about, that ends up being better than what Jason Hayward ended up offering in terms of offensive ability. And I would argue Piquet Armstrong plays a much more defensively demanding position in center field. So I 1,000% take that bargain. I'm absolutely with Pat on that.
Let's take a look ahead at the schedule coming up for the Cubs. They are on an off day on the Monday, June 2nd that we record this. Looking ahead, though, for the rest of the month of June, holy cow, 26 games in 27 days. They're off June 16th and June 30th, and that's it. I'm used to them being off every Thursday and most Sundays because they just were losing a lot. But now here they are playing a lot of games in June. That's going to be a tough stretch for them, and they've got some tough teams coming up here mixed in. So the schedule is shifting a little bit. As we look ahead to the week that will be, you've got 3 at Washington and 3 at the first place Detroit Tigers. Now, any AL Central record is weird because they all are inflated because they play the White Sox so many times. So because of all of those games, how first place and how good are these teams? I do want to recognize the Javi Baez renaissance going on in Detroit. Looking forward to seeing some of that. But I will turn it over to you, James, first. Tough stretch here. All these games, only one day off. And then give me your thoughts on the week ahead.
Yeah, I think that you look at the schedule, and obviously we kind of knew that the series against the Tigers and the Phillies were both going to be real gut checks after kind of coasting through a lot of kind of subpar teams. But I do have to point out that the vaunted Phillies did just get swept in Philadelphia by the Milwaukee Brewers. It's not like, crazier things have certainly happened. And so I'm not going to kind of look ahead to that series just yet, but I do want to point out, even though the Phillies did take 2 out of 3 in Chicago and are obviously a very strong team, they did just get swept, quite embarrassingly, I might add, by those red-hot Brewers. And so definitely looking at this week ahead, I know the Nats have been playing better. I think that the Cubs, you're probably going to end up, hopefully, fingers crossed, seeing a better outing from Colin Ray on Thursday. I know that his last outing was nothing to write home about. Sorry you had to witness that in person, Pat. But I do think that he has shown an ability to, even when he doesn't have his best stuff, to really kind of be able to grind through it. I'm been very impressed by that. I'm really looking forward to seeing Cade Horton go up against the Nats on Tuesday night. I think that's going to end up being a really good game. And then correct me if I'm wrong, guys. Did I see somewhere that Skubal is actually going to pitch against the Cubs? I thought that he had originally been slated to miss them, but it sounds like maybe they may end up mixing up their rotation a little bit.
Yeah.
I thought I had seen he might pitch.
So they had the opportunity to pitch him on schedule to get the guaranteed win against the White Sox. But instead, I think they're going to hold him back for the Cubs on Friday, give him an extra day off, and try to win that White Sox game with somebody out of the stands pitching, and then have a better opportunity against the Cubs.
That's a very fair assessment of the White Sox. I did not realize that Luis Roberts' slugging percentage this season was .291. That does not seem good. I do also want to say, just like the Tigers are, obviously they have the best record in baseball. They've been playing incredibly well. Going into Comerica is going to be very difficult for the Cubs. I do think that ballpark does favor the Cubs, and that they do have kind of the speedsters that can really kind of take extra bases if the ball gets anywhere near the gaps in that cavernous stadium. I do think that does play to their advantage a little bit, but I am going to say I still think that that's probably one where you're happy if you come out of there winning 1 out of 3 games. So I am going to go 3-3 with this, with 2 out of 3 against the Nats, 1 out of 3 against the Tigers. And I will also say I placed a bet with our colleague here at NBC, Jeff Blanzy, about that series because he's a very big Tiger fan. So here's hoping my prediction is wrong. I would love to be wrong about that.
The Tigers, Pat, are 21-8 at home this season.
Yeah,
and the Cubs are going there to play 3.
I would just want one minor correction, James. The Luis Roberts slugging percentage is down to .288 after tonight so far, which puts them at Gage Workman levels. Just to put it in perspective, formerly employed Gage Workman.
Don't you mean Gage unemployment right now?
Yeah, I think so. No, I'd say to your first question, Jeremy, playing so many games in such a short period of time, I really hope the Cubs can get Imanaga back at some point during that stretch. That would be a real shot in the arm. I'd love to go to a 6-man rotation at least one of those times through the, especially like in 3 weeks from now or whatever. Anything they can do to get anybody else healthy, like a Porter Hodge or heaven forbid Eli Morgan or somebody like that, would be great. But I also look at it as an opportunity offensively to give a little bit of a rest to some players. The PCA has played a lot this year, almost every game, I think, if not every game. And he struggles against lefties like Michael Busch does. So I would like to see them maybe rest him a day or two, and strategically maybe against Washington when Mackenzie Gore is pitching, or maybe with Luzardo or somebody with the Phillies the following series. It'd be nice to see, because you want to give guys time off, period, at some point. But the Cubs, if the Cubs could bring up a Ballesteros or somebody, or figure out a way to work it out so that everybody's quasi healthy more or less, but also they can give everybody a breather, like a day off here and a day off there. I don't think Matt Shaw needs too many days off given his, he's only been up recently, but with him, with, Amaya out, hopefully not forever, but with him gone, Carson Kelly probably can't catch every game. So you're going to have to go to McGuire at some point. You have a lot of possibilities. You could play Suzuki in the outfield. I think with Happ being out, as long as he was, maybe he doesn't need as much time off right away, but realistically, in a 26-day stretch, you want to give everybody at least one day off, if not two, like a Tucker and a PCA, give them a couple days off with the caveat that, especially with PCA, you get a tough lefty, just give him a rest so he doesn't have to go up against him. You can bring him in later in the game when the pitcher's out of the game and pinch hit him or put him in for defense or whatever, pitch run him and then put him in for defense, whatever you want to do. But I'll be interested to see how Craig Counsell can utilize the full roster, knowing ahead of time. I don't want Dansby Swanson to get exhausted either, by the way, as he sometimes is prone to do. So it'd be nice to maybe play Horner at short a couple times and, play somebody else at second. We'll see how that all plays out. But that's my hope for that stretch of games. As far as the next six, though, the first six, I'm kind of in agreement. I think Washington's a better team than they've played so far, than their record indicates. So if the Cubs could go 3-3 against them, I consider that, or two out of three, I consider that a good start. And then obviously with Detroit, especially with Skubal pitching, probably you can't expect to win 2 out of 3, so maybe lose 2 out of 3. I will say that when the Cubs play Washington in this next series, keep an eye out for this James Wood kid, the left fielder. He's really good. And he's somebody. CJ Abrams, their shortstop's really good. They've got a couple guys in that lineup who are names that you're going to probably hear for a long time. So they're an up and coming team, and like to see how we do against them. But the Cubs also, luckily, are due to have an offensive explosion at some point here soon, right? I mean, after a whole week of kind of quiet bats. So if you're going to have quiet bats, do it against teams that can't hit themselves and win 5 out of 6, and then play the next 6 games and go to town. So I think 3-3 is a realistic.
We'll make it unanimous 3-3. You guys sold me on it 100%, and we'll talk about the rest. It doesn't get any easier here. Phillies, Pittsburgh, Milwaukee, Seattle, and then we see the Cardinals for the first time in St. Louis for 4, and then at Houston for 3 to close out a tougher month of June than we had for
the one advantage in June, though, is I will say, starting with that 4-game series against the Pirates, the Cubs have a 10-game homestand, which is the longest homestand of the season. So although they don't have a day off, they're going to be in Chicago the whole time, or much of it. So if they can weather the storm in these next 6 games, the 10 after that are all at home.
Well, let's before we close out the show, as we do every week with our Cubs player profile, where our guest gets to choose a Cubs player from the past for us to profile every single week. James, you are going to be on the clock to choose another Cubs player. I've posted the list in the chat of the already chosen players. So you think about that as we do this. But before we do, I did want to make sure we get in a plug before we get into the player profile for your new project, James. Please, it's something that'll be really interesting and hopefully exciting for a lot of our listeners. Tell them about the new project you got going on.
Yeah, sure. So I appreciate the opportunity to self-promote here, Jeremy, but it had been a little while since I had done any sort of Cubs podcasting ever since NBC Sports Chicago wrapped up operations. Rest in peace to the station back in September. But I've been looking for an opportunity to get back into doing some more regular Cubs content and Cubs conversation. And as much as I, enjoy being a monthly guest of you guys, and hopefully will continue to be, hopefully this won't, end that being a competitor, so to speak. But myself and Frank Nova, formerly known as Forklift, for those of you who also follow the Chicago Blackhawks and are familiar with the infamous Hockey Night website way back in the day during their Stanley Cup heyday. Frank and I are hosting a new Cubs podcast called Home Runs and Handshakes. And yes, that is a reference to the Chicago handshake. In fact, I took one before our recording of our debut episode last night. That is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, produced by Claire Philby, who is just an amazing producer. I work with her at NBC. She now works at CBS and is just incredibly talented, and really excited to work with both of them. And yeah, to kind of lend our brand of frivolity and ultimately, in my case, probably stupidity to the discourse around the Chicago Cubs. And I can't wait to do it more often.
It's very exciting, and of course, yes, you will be still expected to show up here every single month, and all boats rise with the tide. So we love to see another positive Cubs podcast into the pile here. So this is great news. I'm very excited to see it, and I love the homage to the Chicago handshake, old style, and Malort, of course, and if you. There's a great book on the history of Malort that I highly recommend. If you haven't read that, go ahead and do that if you want to get it. Also, it's a good part of Chicago history as well. So look for that book. Subscribe to James's podcast available anywhere podcasts are.
That is correct. Yeah, we're already up there, and I was very surprised by that. But you know what? We fooled them enough. And by the way, I do want to mention Josh Noel, who wrote the book that you mentioned, the Malort, The Redemption of a Revered and Reviled Spirits. Fun fact, he came on a podcast here at NBC Chicago with our own Alex Maragos. I managed to give them both a shot of Malort. So that was indeed my fault when he was here. So it's all full circle.
Yeah, excellent stuff. And so now you're on the clock to start thinking about who you would like us to profile as we hand over to last week. We had, again, Matt Trueblood on the podcast, and his choice, Pat, was Rondell White.
It was. By the way, James, just as an aside, when you finish rehabilitating the reputation of Malort, maybe go to cyanide next, as long as you're going to do all the poisons, liquid poisons. Now on to Rondell White. Born in 1972, which would make Rondell, he is 53 years old only. Feels like he was around a long time ago, but he's only 53. Is born in Georgia. First round draft pick, 24th pick overall in the 1990 draft by the Montreal Expos.
I remember, yeah.
The team that I was a fan of watching and going to Montreal to watch in person. That was an interesting year, by the way, that draft. The Cubs drafted 23rd that year. But prior to that, the first pick overall in the 1990 draft was a guy named Chipper Jones, Hall of Famer. In that first round, they had Tony Clark, Alex Fernandez, Carl Everett, former Cubs, Shane Andrews, Todd Van Poppel, and Jeremy Burnetz.
Wow.
Along with Hall of Famer Mike Mussina. So, I mean, it was when you go back through drafts, that was a pretty good one.
There's so many of these that we've done where we mentioned someone was drafted and then there's maybe one MLB player in the entire first round sometimes.
Yeah. We have the Players Association president, 2 Hall of Famers, a couple other guys who had very successful careers. And of course the Cubs with the 23rd pick, at the time Rondell White was in the on deck circle, and the Cubs instead went with what would turn out to be a somewhat famous pick, Lance Dixon. You may remember his 3 games and his 7-something ERA and his negative 0.4 WAR. There's a lot of hope for Lance. Unfortunately, it just didn't come to fruition. And instead of getting Rondell White, Cubs went with Lance Dixon, 23rd pick overall. And trust me, if you go into other rounds later on, it goes on and on. There are good players throughout that entire, like even in the 9th, 10th, and 11th rounds, like, oh, that guy had a lifetime 28 WAR. That's pretty good. Like things like that. Anyway, Rondell tore it up in the minors as a 24th pick. He was by 1992, he was the Expos' top prospect. He was voted minor league MEP, most exciting player. It's an award. And he made it up. Yeah, there you go. Made it up to the Expos in 1993. Played with the Expos from 93 to 2000. Like so many of the players we've mentioned today, he debuted at a young age. He was only 21 when he first came up. And by the time he was 25, he put up a season with 4.8 WAR, 28 homers, 82 ribbies. He hit over 300 for the last 3 years that he was with the Expos, and had a really solid start to his career. Played left field primarily, but he was a good left fielder with them, and had good defensive WAR as well as offensive. He was traded to the Cubs on July 31st of 2000, the trade deadline for Scott Downs. And he got to the Cubs and he went nuts. He played 19 games in August that year, and he hit 328 with a 480 OPS. Sadly, on August 26th of that year, he dislocated his left shoulder trying to steal second base in the 6th inning, and missed the rest of the season. So we only got him for 19 games. Cubs ended up, after he left, unable to kind of overcome that. They went 9-25 the rest of the way and finished probably in last place. That was the era when Sammy Sosa was still hitting his 160 RBIs and 60 some homers a year. But he really needed Rondell and Rondell's White's bat in that lineup to protect him. And unfortunately, the injury cut his season short. It was a recurring fate for him, unfortunately, Rondell. The following year, in 2001, Rondell hit 307 with the Cubs with a on-base plus slugging percentage of 900, a 134 OPS plus, awfully good. 17 homers, 50 RBIs. Unfortunately, it was all in 357 plate appearances because he was injured on June 25th. He was out till the 12th of July. He came back. You may remember the day after the Cubs beat the White Sox when Ricky Gutierrez hit that grand slam in the 8th inning, just off the top of my head. And he came back the next day on the 13th of July, Cubs Sox at Wrigley. It was a Saturday. And he re-injured his hamstring, and he was out till September 1st. So he missed the following 6 weeks. And then he came back in September. By then, it was too late. The Cubs had already fallen too far out without him. And again, without his bat in the lineup, the Cubs were unable to succeed. Cubs, at the end of the year, he elected to go to free agency, ended up playing with the Yankees, the Padres in 2003. He was an all-star with the Padres. His one and only all-star team, by the way, was after his Cubs career, of course. Then he played with the Royals and Tigers and Twins. Still a good player overall. If you look at his overall stats, he played 15 years in the majors, and he had 1,519 hits, 198 home runs, 768 RBIs, hit 284 with a 799 OPS and a plus 108 if you want to index it. 28.2 WAR. He hit 306 times, so he was a good hitter. But unfortunately, when you look at him and you look at his year by year, he just got hurt so much. It was really too bad. He only had one season in his entire career where he played more than 138 games. 5 times due to injuries, he played fewer than 100 games. So, and you hear the story all the time, right, of the guys who just seem injury prone, and if they could only play full seasons, just imagine how good they could be. Like that season with the Cubs when he had the 17 homers and 50 RBIs in half a season. You double those numbers, and it's probably a whole different legacy for him throughout his career. So that was sort of the story for him as a player. He did, when called upon and when healthy, in the playoffs, both in 2002 and 2006 in the American League Divisional Series. Cubs, of course, elected not to play in the postseason that part of the century. But in the ALDS, he hit 1 year in 2002. He hit 333 with a 1.67 OPS.
That was the Yankee season?
Yes. And then with the Twins, he hit 417 with a 1.17 OPS. So he made the most of his playoff appearances when he had the chance. His teams did not lose because of him. How about that? He has a couple interesting notes. He hit for the cycle in 1995. when he was still with the Expos, against the Giants in a game when he also tied the all-time hits record with 6. And he scored 5 runs. The only player to ever hit for the cycle, get 6 hits and score 5 runs in a game. One of the greatest individual performances in history. Unfortunately, he probably got hurt the next day, so or shortly thereafter. So it didn't last. I also note that when he was eligible for the Hall of Fame, he got no votes. I think that if he had just not had the injuries, if he'd played like 3 more full seasons, I think we'd probably think of him not quite as a Moises Alou good, but still a little bit better good. Like I think he could have squeezed out an extra All-Star game here or there, and he would have been somebody you're like, oh yeah, he was a good player. Unfortunately, in order to think of him as a good player, you really have to have caught him in the certain time periods when he was good. Frankly, during his Cubs stretch in those 2 years, if you just count the games he played in, he was fantastic. He was like one of the best hitters on the team. He's almost a all quarter century player for that matter, per at bat. But alas, there just weren't enough of them. He's also, and I did not realize this until recently, he is the son-in-law of former White Sox manager Jerry Manuel. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah, Jerry Manuel's son-in-law. So that's a story of Rondell White, a story of potential, a story of a good guy, but just somebody who, for a variety of different injuries, was never able to kind of put it all together over long stretches of time. But when he did play, he was a good player.
Yeah, it seems like an injury-prone player like that, the Cubs would not be a great fit with the way that Cubs and injuries seem to be in the early 2000s.
If you could have drafted him over Lance Dixon, would you
have? No doubt about it. Excellent. All right, James, who are we going to profile next week?
So I was just looking at the list that you provided, and I feel like I've gone with 2 high quality of players with my picks of Sean Dunston and Derek Lee this season. Although I was kind of surprised when I looked up the player that I decided I wanted to profile, or you guys to profile next week. So I'm not looking for, birthday presents or anything, but my birthday is coming up. I'll be turning a significantly high age this year. And so I looked back to the Cubs game on the day that I was born in June of 1985, and it was a barn burner of a game at Shea Stadium, won by the Mets by a score of 1-0. Dwight Gooden was on the hill for the Mets in that game, ended up pitching a complete game shutout against the Cubs, which I know in 1985, really shocking. Dwight Gooden would have had that good of a game, but the opposing pitcher in that game for the Chicago Cubs did not have himself a very bad afternoon at the office. He pitched 7 innings, gave up 1 earned run, was a tough luck loser, was followed in relief, but it was not. And during his career with the Cubs, was with the Cubs 6 seasons, had a wins above replacement of 12.2, had a 42-42 record and a 3.81 ERA.
That's Sanderson?
Not a bad run with the Chicago Cubs. It is indeed one Mr. Scott Sanderson that I will be picking for your next profile. Yeah. I do want to also flag, by the way, in this game, just because I love looking at some of the names that were, involved in this. Clint Hurdle, future Major League manager, played right field for the Mets in that game. You had Larry Boa and Davey Lopez were both in that game. And my favorite of the bunch, the leadoff hitter for the New York Mets that day, second baseman Wally Backman, who happened to be the manager of the Joliet Jackhammers when I turned 21 years old. So just a phenomenal trip down memory lane with a lot of names that I recognized. And I was like, you know what? Scott Sanderson absolutely is the guy that I'm going to pick for you guys.
Perfect choice, and always a great time getting to catch up with you, James, and talk Cubs. Please remind all of our listeners where they can find your work on the internet and follow you on the social media platforms.
I have been forcing people to read my Cubs content on NBC Chicago. I've been putting my byline on it and everything. So definitely writing a lot of Cubs articles for them right now. I also, as I mentioned earlier, am co-hosting the Home Runs and Handshakes podcast with Frank Nova, available on Spotify, Apple, and also on YouTube. You'll be able to find videos of our podcasts. And then if you want to follow me, I am on Blue Sky, and I am also on Instagram. So if you want to see a bunch of pictures of bison and things like that from my recent trip to the Badlands, you know where to find them.
No pictures of the Badlands or anything as photogenic up on our social media platforms at Wrigleyville Nats, but you should still go and follow us there to see mostly pictures of Wrigley Field and links to this podcast. And you can also give us a like and subscribe when you're on YouTube looking up James's show. You should also be make sure that you're looking up our show. Search for Wrigleyville Nation Podcast over on YouTube. The likes, the subscribes, it helps us work the algorithm so other Cub fans can find the show. So please show your support over there, even if you don't consume the video version of this podcast. Giving us those likes and subscribes helps us out. You can still find this podcast, the audio version, anywhere podcasts are found. So please tell your Cub fan friends about the show. And if Spotify is your podcatcher of choice and you're listening to the audio version there, you're also getting the video version of the podcast via Spotify as well. So if you open up the player on your phone right there, you can see our faces as we talk about the podcast. And with that, we are going to wrap it up and we are going to call it a show. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.